This is StoryRobot. Welcome to r/Tales from Call Centers. Our first story of today is, I'll sue you for calling 911 for me. About a decade ago, I was working customer service for a large cell phone company. My specific assignment was handling customer complaints, either as letters or as complaints lodged with first-tier customer service. I had a case of a guy who said he had thousands of dollars of fraudulent international roaming on his account. Okay, that's serious, so I look at his account. Sure enough, his last phone bill was for about $5,000, of which most of that was international roaming. Well, I look closer. The roaming is on all the lines on the account. Then looking at the call histories, there are calls from the Los Angeles area. Then a gap of a few hours. Then calls from the Miami area. Then a few hours later the international roaming begins with cruise ship roaming. So, the more I dig into it, it's clear the guy took his whole family on a Caribbean cruise, found out they had phone signal on the cruise ship, which counts as international roaming, and phone signal on every island they went to, also international roaming, and they were constantly talking on their phones the whole time. Well, I can't take that charge off the bill. The most I could do would be to give $500 off as a courtesy if he acknowledged he was wrong and I explained to him the nature of international roaming and his phone plan and he understood it. Well, I call the guy. When I try to break it to him, as politely and professionally as I could, that I cannot take those charges off the bill, he starts raising his voice at me, screaming, blustering, talking about how rich and powerful and important he is and how I better take that charge off the bill if I know what's good for me. Well, that wasn't going to make me change my mind. He then pauses for a moment, stammers, "I'm having a heart attack," and hangs up. Uh-oh. I immediately tell my supervisor. My supervisor tells me to call 911 and direct emergency services to the customer while he tries to contact the customer. I call 911 from my workstation, which sets off an alarm in the call center. Everyone knows I'm on an emergency call. In less than a minute every supervisor and manager there is crowded around our area and has learned what's going on. I get the local 911. I explain what's going on, they patch me in to the 911 in Bakersfield, California. I explain the situation and am on the line with their 911 while my supervisor is calling every number on the customer's account to get him. He tries calling the customer back. No answer. He calls the other 4 lines on the account and gets the customer's wife and 3 kids. And tells them what's going on and that we're trying to see if this man is okay. His wife says she's leaving work now to go home and check on him. His kids are all old enough to drive, and they all say they're leaving whatever they're doing to go home and check on their dad. Around this time, I get off the line with 911, and my boss is putting the calls he's making on speakerphone for everyone around to hear. He gets to the last number on the account. The landline. This is usually vestigial. Most landline numbers on accounts were obviously out of use, but he was checking to be sure. He calls the number. The customer picks up on the other end. My boss introduces himself. The customer goes ballistic saying he didn't want to talk to us. Apparently, he refused to pick up when called back because he said he was too angry at us to talk to us. Well, my boss let him know we'd called 911 because he'd reported to us he was having a heart attack. The guy said that he wasn't having a heart attack, he was just saying that to make it clear how much we were upsetting him by not taking those phony charges off the bill. At about this moment, you can hear a siren in the background and the customer is asking what's going on. There's a pounding on the customer's door that can be heard over the phone. My boss explains that we've contacted 911 since he reported he was having a medical emergency and we couldn't reach him. There's louder pounding on the customer's door and we can hear some shouting in the distance. The customer goes ballistic, saying that if he has to pay anything for this ambulance call, he'll sue us. He shouts about how he'll have us all fired, he'll sue our company and us personally, and how when it's over he'll own our whole company and have us all thrown in jail. And then he hangs up. Needless to say, we never heard another word from the guy or about this incident. Our second story of today is, the retention department, the enemy of customer service. A decade ago, I was working customer service for a major cell phone company in the US. We'd often get cancellation requests for accounts, either in writing or by calling in. However, any tier of regular customer service couldn't cancel accounts, only the retention department could do so. We'd have to transfer call-in customers to them, and if they wrote in we'd have to call them, and then transfer them to retention. The terms of service were written such that you must call in to cancel, written requests weren't allowed. Also, technically the legal department and executive escalations could cancel accounts but you did not want to get involved with anything they were touching. In any case, retention was the customer's enemy. They were graded on one metric, and one metric alone. The ratio of requests they get to actual cancellations that happen. To that end, that would engage in some very unethical and probably illegal conduct to ensure nobody quit. If you wanted to stop being a customer, you had to be very persistent or lucky to get a retention person who would actually cancel an account, get a lawyer, transfer to another provider, or just stop paying your bills long enough and take the hit to your credit. For a long time, we'd just transfer those calls to retention and consider it handled. But then we started to notice the same people calling in month after month, saying they've already talked to retention and were told their account was canceled. Sure enough, I'd check the account and it would say in the notes that they called in, were transferred to retention, which would say that the call dropped, or the customer hung up, or that the customer had agreed to not cancel, which they would say they didn't agree to, or say that suddenly they were hung up on. So, we started to conference call them with retention instead of transferring, and then mute our headsets and listen in, as sometimes they would be promised that the account is canceled, while we'd look at the account and see it wasn't. Or they just suddenly hung up on. Or sometimes they'd make outrageous, silly promises to get someone to stay, like promising them months of outright free service. Then not implement that plan or document the promise, and of course they'd call in next month wondering why they got a big bill instead of free phone service. Before long, we were told that we could only transfer customers to retention and under no circumstances should we conference call in, on the grounds that retention has proprietary techniques to retain customers and dissuade them from canceling their accounts, and we aren't authorized to hear or know about the techniques they use to talk people into remaining customers. From listening to their calls, we realized that proprietary techniques was a euphemism for lying and atrociously bad customer service. We took the exact literal wording of that order and complied maliciously. We'd transfer customers to retention, then check back on their account an hour later. If it wasn't set up for cancellation, we'd call the customer back to check and see if they'd agreed to stay with the company, especially since account notes would always say they had, or that the call had dropped. They almost never said they actually had, and were enraged to hear that the person they had just talked to lied to them. They were told the account was cancelled, that it was over, etc. But I could see otherwise in the account, and the notes the person they talked to said otherwise. So, I'd note that I'd called them back, note the discrepancy in the account that the customer said their account had been cancelled, and send them back to retention, this time with the customer very irate. Usually this would get the account actually cancelled. Retention was always very upset when we tried to transfer them over. They'd start to ask if we tried to save the account and what we did to try to keep them from canceling. I left the call center around the time the arms race in cancellations got to there. I presume that at some point the center I left was told to stop seeing if cancellation requests were actually being performed. Our third and last story of today is father rescuing his daughter financially. I work for a company that issues credit cards. A few months back, before I learned about this subreddit, I had an interesting conversation with a guy. It was something like this. The mont's daughter dug herself into a bunch of credit card debt. She was like early 20s and out into the world. He had called with her on the line back last year, so like spring 2019, to close her account, but for whatever reason it didn't get closed. Who knows, this was a year ago, and honestly based on the conversation I think there is more to that story. So a few weeks after this supposed cancellation, his daughter called and orders a card replacement and enrolls into a 0% interest promo for 6 months and racks up a bunch of charges. Keeping in mind she's a grown woman making these decisions. Well, needless to say, a year later now the interest has been kicking in. The dad apparently finds out because she is past due and getting a penalty APR, and now he's calling to raise all kind of hell because we should not have allowed her to order a new card or have given her a 0% interest. It was funny, I was confused at first and double clarified with him. Me, so just to understand, this is her account, correct? Him, yes. Me, so she reordered the card of her own will and made these charges knowing it was a credit card. Him, well yes, but she doesn't know how credit cards work. He wanted us to waive all the finance charges for like the last 6 months. I tried to empathize with the guy. I know it's a tough spot to see your kid going through a life lesson, but she reordered a replacement card after you guys supposedly called to cancel it. She clearly knew she was going behind his back and used the card willingly. He was going to pay her bill and bail her out again. He even admitted he was having his own financial issues pre-COVID. It's awful. We really have an accountability problem with consumers and especially parents rescuing their kids. Sometimes you got to lay in the bed you made and learn those lessons in the school of hard knocks. Thank you for watching. Error. Problem detected. Not enough subscribers. Please subscribe, like and comment.